Fiddlesticks got a lot of good changes into season 12 here. He got new runes that he can utilize, and he got new items. So let's go ahead and start from the smite, which is pretty simple for Fiddlesticks, right? We're never going to be getting that red smite. Even in your wildest dreams, you're not going to be able to get an auto attack off with your basic combo. So that makes things pretty simple, always going for blue smite. Now you do have a lot of options with the starting items. You can go 1 health potion, control ward. You could even just buy nothing. If you were trying to save gold in specific cases, that's totally fine. Let's say if you were like in a farming matchup, right? Don't need a health potion, don't need a control ward. Might as well just save the gold and then get to an item spike a little bit sooner. There's also some recalls that you can actually get, like certain, you can get like a dark seal plus boots at different times, or maybe a double amp tome. You can abuse that pretty hard. But usually we'll just end up going with 1 health potion and then a control ward. That 1 control ward is going to help you spot out invades. So usually I like to put my effigy right there and then put a control ward right here, because more often than not it's going to be like a graves or something. They'll dash over that wall and then try to surprise you on the blue and gromp, and the last thing you want is a surprise. And then if you're into like a champion like Kane, you could also put the control ward on the raptors or on the red buff to see if the enemy is going to light invade. You have a lot of good options with that. You basically never need that refillable potion, even in a matchup where there'd be a lot of skirmishing. The 1 health potion is going to like do all that you need, because you're going to have it for the 1 fight for a scuttle crab, and then it's going to give you that 150 HP over the duration of the fight. And then whenever you're clearing the camps too, you never run out of HP. It's never even close, so long that you're doing it right, And then if you're not doing it right, well, you don't exactly want to rely on the HP potions as a crutch. So basically always going to be going with the blue smite. And then on our first recall, I like to get dark seal whenever I think that the game's going to be going well. If everything's totally stagnant, right, you could go for just an amp tome, because that will accelerate you in your build path regardless of what mythic item you're building. If you're going predator, even on your worst recall, you're going to have enough gold for the boots. And after that, if you're going predator, you pretty much always want the dark seal. The synergy is just kind of right there, right? You're going to be playing for kills anyways, and then dark seal will let you capitalize on getting some kills. Now, if you're just playing to farm, the boots don't do anything. And I mean, they literally don't do anything. There's no point of getting them until you're level 6. And on your first recall, on your next full clear, you're probably not going to be getting level 6. You'd probably just do another full clear into a reset. So in that case, you'd probably just want to get a double amp tome. Again, regardless of what mythic you're building into, the double amp tomes will work out in so many ways, which is pretty interesting.
Turret plating will fall soon.
And then with that, it will make your clear speed just a little bit faster. So then you have the option of getting the swordpin boots or building into a mythic altogether. I think once you're level 6, it's fine to have the boots just to hold on to, and then if you're fed enough, or if you just have the gold point, then you can choose to go into the swordpin boots. The only thing you really have to consider with the swordpin boots is kind of like if you're getting them for a mid laner, is your ultimate up, or is it going to be up like on this recall? And that's going to be the most important thing, because if it's not, you're not going to be able to utilize that magic pin. So that's a pretty easy way of looking at it. And then when you get that extra movement speed from the boots, it does help you with your ulti. But every time you build towards the swordpin boots like this, you're delaying your mythic item completion. So let's go ahead and talk about the mythic items, because it might be kind of confusing for you, but it's pretty simple for Fiddlesticks. If you don't know what you're doing altogether, I would recommend you just build Protobelt every single game, no matter what, because it's the simplest item to use. It's going to give you the most power. It's going to be very consistent for you. And then even if you're really, really bad, at least if you took a bad ult, you have that Protobelt to get closer to the enemy, right? So at least you have something going for you. And then if you're really good, that dash can be very useful too. So it goes both ways. But let's talk about the other mythic items here. They're all going to be building out of the Lost Chapter, which is kind of useless for the Fiddlesticks. But you can kind of get around it, right? Because you can build amp tome, another amp tome, and then a ruby crystal if you really had to. And then you can complete the Lost Chapter, the Kindle Gem, things like that. And then in the case of Liandry's, it's kind of the same deal. Just complete these component items until you have to buy something else. So With Protobelt, it gives you magic pin, and then it gives you that extra dash, and then the movement speed can be kind of useful. What I like about Protobelt is whenever I'm playing into champions like Ezreal, or if they have a hyper carry like a Kog'Maw, they're gonna have Peel. They're gonna have like an enchanter support, and Protobelt really helps you like get on top of those champions and actually stay on top of them. With something like Liandry's, this is going to be useful if you're playing into bruiser champions, champions like Xin Zhao, Irelia, where they're going to be building a mix of AD and HP. Usually they're going to have Asterix, and Liandry's, it's really, really hard to beat its damage values, where it gives you 12% bonus magic damage. Fiddlesticks deals so much magic damage, it's unreal. So having 12% bonus, plus having the percentage burn on their max health, it really does go a long way. And then you can kind of multiply this by 5 champions, right? Because ideally you're getting a 5-man ult, at the minimum like a 3-man ult. So the Liandry burn damage and then the percentage bonus magic damage amplification is very, very useful for Fiddlesticks. The downside of this item is that it puts you in a very weird build path where you're building like a Lost Chapter early into a Fiendish Codex. Compare this to like the Protobelt, right? We're getting a Blasting Wand, double Amp Tome, so that's a whole lot of AP. Whereas with this, we're getting less AP, and then we're investing into mana and ability haste, which isn't necessarily great for us in the early game. We'd rather just have enough AP, and then even something like Hextech Alternator gives you some extra magic damage early to basically guarantee if you ulti that you're going to kill someone early. So you give up some early power, and then in the case of the Hextech Alternator, you also, or the Protobelt, you give up some HP as well, which makes things harder to play. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is going to be harder for, especially like someone who's new at Fiddlesticks, to utilize, because you're going to ult in and instantly die and not know what's going on. That's going to be the worst part. Okie doke. I think the only other viable option with the Lost Chapter items is Crown of the Shatter Queen. Everfrost is interesting. Well, Everfrost might be viable as well. My problem with Everfrost is that Fiddlesticks already has so much CC in his kit already that if you have to rely on the Everfrost along with like your ulti, your glacial, your fear, and your silence, dude, I don't know like what's there is a place for it, don't get me wrong, but it seems very, very not the way to go in solo queue, that's for sure. You become more of a support to your team. That's not what you want. Fiddlesticks, his BTFO in solo queue is the 1v5 ulti in, kills everyone, right? That's what you want to be doing. And then Luden's is just bad Protobelt. There's no way around that. So with Crown of the Shatter Queen, the advantage that it gives you is, one, it's a cheaper item. What I really like about Crown of the Shatter Queen too is that with its build path, you end up itemizing a lot of ability haste early, and you end up being able to ult a lot sooner than you could otherwise. A lot of people ask like, should I run Ultimate Hunter and things like that? And it's like, even if you did, by the time that you were going to utilize it, you might as well have just built ability haste, because that's where you're going to get access to more early ults, and then that's where you're going to have the impact. Or at least that's kind of what most people are playing with something like Ultimate Hunter. So with Crown of the Shatter Queen, where it's cheaper, it also lets you get to your second item faster, which is very nice. Same with the Everfrost. But you give up a bit of damage with it. So it has 60 ability power. The Liandry's has given you 80. I believe the Protobelt gives you 80 as well, right? The Protobelt gives you 90, and then the 6 magic pin, and it's active, so that's a whole lot of extra damage packed into it. And then the trade-off for Crown of the Shatter Queen is that you get reduced damage whenever you initially take damage, and then once that shield is broken, you gain a little bit more ability power, which is kind of hard for Fiddlesticks to utilize because you're going in with your ulti. I think one thing that this can do when comboed with something like Zhonya's is just make you very, very durable. It's kind of interesting in that sense. It's not so good with these HP items like Fiendish Codex, Rylai's. Since you have access to Glacial Augment now, it's very hard to utilize something like Rylai's, or at least make an argument for it, where you give up so much power on Fiddlesticks for those. But my main point being, with Crown of the Shatter Queen, with Azonia's, it's going to be very, very hard for the enemy to kill you instantly, and that makes things easier. But the trade-off is that you don't instantly kill the enemy as well. So I would say you would only want to go this like when you have allies that are like worth starting a fight for, or if you're very, very far behind and you kind of don't have any choices. But yeah, it's pretty interesting that you have these options now, because in last season you really only had Protobelt and you could rarely go Liandry's. Like, there was way too much damage for you to deal with to go the Liandry's, but now things are kind of simpler. So let's say that we go Protobelt, the item that I recommend that most players start off with. Hopefully by the time we complete Protobelt, we have a Dark Seal, and then if you're winning, it's very simple. Upgrade that to Medjai's. It's going to give you the magic pin bonus on the Protobelt, and then from here, I think more often than not, you just want to go Shadowflame. With Shadowflame, this is a new item. It's very, very useful. If you can, just get the needlessly large rod and then build into the Hextech alternator. You don't want to be doing like Amp Tome, Ruby Crystal, this into this. You just want the raw AP, especially at the time of the game you would be purchasing this, because by that time, 150 HP isn't going to be changing how a fight plays out, while 60 ability power will, especially with your rank 2 ulti. So with Shadowflame, this is like an intensely good item. It is unreal how good this item is for Fiddlesticks. 3,000 gold for 100 ability power, 200 HP, 200 HP, dude, and then the passive damage to champions benefits from 10 to 20 magic pin based on the target's current health. And then you gain the max value if the target was recently affected by shields. Now, one thing I have noticed with this item is that with shield bow, it doesn't necessarily do much against it, because it would be like if you ult a target who already has a Lulu shield on them, that's where you would get the most value out of it, not whenever you ult in and then you proc the shield bow. But that magic pin that you get whenever you initially go in combination with 100 ability power, it's very, very hard to beat it as a third item, especially in solo queue where you can accelerate to these three items very, very quickly. Good job, team. It's very hard to beat this, and then where you get 200 HP, it makes it so much easier to play out the mid game with 250 HP from the Rocket Belt and then 200 HP from the Shadowflame. Like, you're significantly tankier than, let's say, if we had the Liandry's into like a death cap, right? We have a lot more AP, but now we're at 1,000. Okay, let's say we were level 11, right? We have 1,488 HP compared to bang, bang, 1,900. And what HP also does in solo queue is it kind of just gives you a little bit more variance. It makes things easier to play if you're playing well, or if your allies are playing bad, or if the enemy's playing well. Is like it covers a whole lot of bases. So then after the Shadowflame, all you really have to ask yourself is like, one, do you need anti-healing? You can pick up an Oblivion Orb pretty much anywhere within the builds after you complete the Rocket Belt or any Mythic item. And then after the Shadowflame, if the enemy has significant amounts of magic pin, then you basically have to get the Void Staff. So this would be if they have things like Force of Nature. What are some magic resist items? Maw of Malmortius, that's an easy one. Gargoyles. Or items like that where it really, really matters. Things like Wit's End you can kind of just deal with, because Fiddlesticks deals so much damage with his Crowstorm. And then if one target has something like Wit's End, it might not be your job to kill them. That's also something to consider. And then Banshee's Veil, things like that, where if they're going to be significantly tankier, then you're basically forced into a Void Staff. But because of the Shadowflame, you can avoid the Void Staff a lot longer than you used to be able to. Good job, team. So I would say for your 4th/3rd item, if you don't have the Medjai's, you probably want to be aiming for the Death Cap more often than not, because that's going to be basically the item that ends the game. The Death Cap is kind of like an Infinity Edge for an ADC, at least the way it functions on Fiddlesticks, because with his ulti, you have a 225% ratio. So that's going to go a lot further than a lot of the other items can give you, because you're just getting as much ability power like possible through something like Death Cap. So any of the mid-range items, like I already said, with like Rylai's, Demonic Embrace, things like that, it's going to be harder to use those compared to like a Death Cap, at least as a 3rd item. Cosmic Drive, we don't need that CDR, we don't really care. Horizon Focus, we're not at Xerath, you know, it's not exactly the best synergy. So really it's like a Death Cap, a Void Staff, maybe a Zonia's or a Banshee's Veil in different cases. But more often than not, you should really be aiming for the death cap. And then if you had to buy into the Oblivion Orb, probably delay the completion into Morello's and try to get to the death cap as well, in the same sort of way. Now, if the 4th Dragon fight or the Elder Dragon fight is going to happen, you can complete Morello's just to be as strong as you can on that fight. But that's about that. So yeah, that's the Protobelt build. One more time, it's like you would start your jungle item, first recall, probably just go for a Dark Seal and then an Amp Tome. Next recall, ideally we can go for a Blasty Wand. If not, we could just get Boots and another Amp Tome. And then from there, on our next recall, if we don't have a Blasty Wand, we're really missing out and we're totally screwed. And you probably just shouldn't buy a Hextech Alternator at that point. And then just full clear reset, get the Blasty Wand, get the Hextech Alternator, and then go out there, get a kill so you can come back with Hextech Rocket Belt and the Swordpin Boots. And then if we're winning from there, we can upgrade the Medjais. And then as our second item, definitely going to be Shadowflame. Very rarely would you want something over the Shadowflame. And then from here, if we're going to play to basically solo carry the game, just sit on the needlessly large rods when we can get them, upgrade it to death cap, and then if we get to the death cap, right, probably just a Void Staff. If we're at like level 18, any of the other items compared to the Void Staff, you're not going to get as much damage. You're really giving up something with like the utility in Zonias. People really do overrate Zonias on Fiddlesticks. Okie doke. So now it'd be if we're going to be building into the Crown of the Shatter Queen, Liandry's, or Everfrost. With all of these, since they have pretty similar build paths, the only one being different in Liandry's, whenever you're building into these, the only things you really have to do is just build the Amp Tomes and not build the other things, right? It can be totally fine to be sitting on 3 Amp Tomes like this instead of a single Lost Chapter, because we'd go from, well, this is with the Gathering Storm, but we'd have 40 ability power compared to having 60 if we had the 3 Amp Tomes. And then the extra mana and ability haste don't matter when we're level 4, level 5, you know? So, build the Amp Tomes with these items before you complete any of the, basically complete all the component items before you complete the recipes into the Mythic. So if we're building Crown of the Shatter Queen, it's kind of the same deal. We'd get this, get Swordpin Boots, and then you could still go Shadowflame. I think this is still a very, like, insanely good item because it's going to synergize with the HP you get from Crown of the Shatter Queen and then being tankier. I already mentioned with the Zonias, you can use this to survive for a very long time, but that does make you more of a support. So we could go Shadowflame, Crown of the Shatter Queen, and then from here, probably just towards a Void Staff if we had to, or the Death Cap altogether, because it's really crucial that you get a whole lot of AP on Fiddlesticks, and the other items still just don't offer that. If you're going for a more mid-range build, like you could have a Morello's, so we'd be sitting on like 2000 HP here, but it's not that useful. At least the tanky part of that's not super useful. Having the Grievous Wounds on five champions can be, but that's going to be situational. For the Liandry's, whenever you're building into it, again, just build the Amp Tomes first and then complete it. With Liandry's, it's kind of different compared to the Protobelt and then the Crown of the Shatter Queen, or even the Everfrost. Whether you would want to get Shadowflame or not is kind of situational, depending on what type of champions you're playing into. If the enemy is going to get a significant amount of magic resist, which is like when you would want to build Liandry's anyways, you'd be building it into like Bruiser champions. It's kind of strange, but I think you'd probably just want to go for Death Cap. Death Cap is like your second item, and then a Void Staff. With Shadowflame into champions like Xin Zhao and things like that, utilizing the Magic Pin is going to be a lot harder because they'll have like Merc Treads and then a whole lot of HP. So the way you cut through that is just by having a whole lot of AP. With a build like this, you're going to be a lot more fragile, and then you're going to be a lot more dependent on your team. That's why I don't like this build in solo queue too much. Even when it's the optimal build, I would still just rather have the Protobelt and the Shadowflame because I can start the fight myself or do things myself without having a reliance on teammates. Because if I'm waiting if I'm waiting for my team to start a fight over the wall and then they're just not doing it with a build like this, I'm totally screwed because they have to pull the enemy into me and then I have to get a good ulti over. If I have to flash into the enemy, it's doomed. I don't have the tools to stay on them. And then I don't have the survivability, right? So you become very, very reliant on your team setting up a proper fight. And then also you need the enemy to have champions that dive onto your team so that you're guaranteed a good ulti. Unless you can somehow achieve a very ridiculous position, right? Being like behind them at the start of a fight or something crazy. So yeah, it's very, very hard to utilize the Liandrys with a build like this. But the reward is a little bit higher, or like a whole lot higher. It just takes a whole lot more execution. And with Fiddlesticks, the annoying thing is that the execution is kind of out of your hands. It's mostly, does your team do it right? And you know what the answer to that one is, man. When have they ever done it right? So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Fiddlesticks items for Season 12. I think it's very, very, well, it's a whole lot better than it was last season. The Protobelt with the Shadowflame, it's like that 2 item spike is so much stronger. And then like by the time you'd complete Shadowflame, you could only be sitting on 2 needlessly large raws, even if you were outrageously fed. So this really like helps seal the deal in a game where you're already dominating on Fiddlesticks. I really like this item. And the other items, at least the ones that were changed, don't really affect Fiddlesticks too much. There might be a build with something like, say, Crown of the Shatter Queen, right? Crown of the Shatter Queen or Everfrost into like wacky stuff like you have Cosmic Drive, damaging a champion with 3 separate attacks or spells, grants you 15% movement speed. It's okay, but the same sort of like movement speed and whatnot, like you can get that from the Protobelt, so I don't exactly see the value in this. And then getting 2 Qs or 2 Es off doesn't do anything, and that's what the ability haste would be for. And you have Demonic Embrace, which isn't that much. It's 14 ability power with 2 items, Bob. So 3 items, that's 18 ability power. Wow, it's something. Not exactly great though. And then Horizon Focus, that's just not for Fiddlesticks. If you're getting Horizon Focus over Shadowflame, like you're just out of your mind at that point. It's mostly just Shadowflame. Rylai's can be good. It's very situational though. Very, very situational. And then again, it makes you more of a support, which is just, at least it's no good for me, man. If I'm not killing at least 3 champions by myself as Fiddlesticks, I'm not going to win a game. So that's kind of always the game plan. Get 25 Magi stacks, get a little bit of this, maybe sit on a Void Staff if I have to. If not, a bunch of needlessly large rods until it's a death gap. And the nice part about this too is that you can be sitting on these from like 23 minutes to 30 minutes and it can still be fine. Whereas if you're building into these wacky items, it's like you're sitting on just like kind of bullshit, like kind of useless components for later in the game. Another good reason to avoid them. So yeah. And then on Zhonya's, I know a whole lot of people are very addicted to this item on Fiddlesticks, but the same issue with the enemy has to come into your team. That's the issue I have with Zhonya's, because you can't ulti into the enemy and then get on top of them and then use the Zhonya's, because then they can just walk away. With Fiddlesticks, the whole dynamic of his rework is that whenever you go in, you immediately fear the targets that you're on. And with the new Glacial Augment, you have that slow, as you can see, so I think you're better off utilizing that aspect of Fiddlesticks rather than an ult in, Zhonya's, and watch the enemy walk away. Or being like a weird version of Karthus, right, where Karthus Zhonya's with his E going, but instead that's just your ulti, because your ulti is everything on Fiddlesticks. So better to amplify it rather than amplifying your own safety. Yeah, it's just like take better ults, and then play the fights better. That's the best advice I can give. So yeah, if you like the video, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe for more League of Legends content. Alrighty, peace.